What happens when a 67-year-old grandmother walks onto one of America's most elite sniper training facilities? Most would assume she's lost, confused, or visiting family. But sometimes, the most dangerous assumptions are the ones we make about age, experience, and what a true expert actually looks like. This is the story of Gloria Mendez, and how 5 impossible shots changed everything the military thought they knew about precision, experience, and respect. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The Nevada desert stretched endlessly beyond the perimeter of Camp Morrison, where the morning heat was already climbing toward triple digits despite the early hour. This wasn't just any military installation, it was home to the most elite sniper training program in the United States Armed Forces, where only the top 2% of marksmen from across all branches came to prove they belonged among America's deadliest. Precision Shooters. Staff Sergeant Marcus Thompson adjusted his tactical vest and checked his chronometer for the 3rd time in 5 minutes. At 28, he was the youngest instructor ever appointed to the Advanced Sniper School, a distinction he'd earned through 4 tours in Afghanistan, and a kill record that had made him something of a legend among special operations communities. His steel-gray eyes swept across the assembled group of 12 elite marksmen, who had gathered for this morning's final qualification exercise, the test that would separate the exceptional from the merely excellent. "Gentlemen," Thompson called out, his voice cutting through the desert silence like a blade. "Today's assessment will determine which of you possess the mental discipline and technical precision required for conveyor Tier 1 operations. This isn't about being good enough for regular military service. This is about proving you can perform when failure means American lives are lost." The recruits stood at attention, each one representing the pinnacle of marksmanship from their respective units. Marine Corps Scout Sniper Daniel Rodriguez had never missed a target beyond 800 meters. Army Ranger Captain Michael Stevens held 3 separate records for accuracy under combat conditions. Navy SEAL Lieutenant James Wilson had completed more high-value target eliminations than most operators achieved in entire careers. These weren't weekend warriors or fresh recruits. These were men who had already proven themselves in combat, and were now competing for positions in operations so classified that their existence would never be officially acknowledged. The range itself was a marvel of military engineering, stretching across 2 miles of carefully designed terrain that replicated every possible environment where precision shooting might be required. Urban obstacles, elevation changes, wind channels, and weather simulation equipment could create conditions that matched any operational theater in the world. The targets weren't simple bullseyes, but sophisticated systems that moved unpredictably, appeared and disappeared at random intervals, and required split-second decision-making combined with technical excellence. Thompson walked among the assembled marksmen, noting the subtle signs of nervousness that even elite operators couldn't completely suppress when facing career-defining evaluations. Rodriguez kept adjusting his rifle scope despite having zeroed it perfectly an hour earlier. Stevens repeatedly checked his ammunition count, even though each man had been issued identical loads. Wilson maintained the stoic expression that SEALs were famous for, but Thompson caught him glancing toward the observation tower, where senior officers would be monitoring their performance. "The qualification course you're about to attempt," Thompson continued, "has been completed successfully by fewer than 40 operators in the past 5 years. It requires not just accuracy, but the ability to adapt to changing conditions, make real-time calculations under pressure, and demonstrate the kind of precision that separates good soldiers from the warriors who handle missions that don't officially exist." The morning sun climbed higher, casting sharp shadows across the range and creating the kind of contrast and visual distortion that could turn a routine shot into a nightmare of miscalculation. Thompson had designed the timing deliberately, The shifting light would add another variable to an already complex challenge, forcing the marksmen to constantly adjust their calculations and prove they could maintain accuracy under less than ideal conditions. Captain Stevens stepped forward slightly, his confidence evident in the way he held his customized M24 rifle. "Sergeant Thompson, what's the target sequence for today's qualification?" Thompson smiled, but the expression held no warmth. "5 targets, Captain. Different ranges, different elevations, different environmental conditions. You'll have exactly 12 minutes to identify, acquire, and eliminate all 5. Miss any target, and you fail. Take longer than 12 minutes, and you fail. Any questions about equipment malfunction or environmental conditions, and you fail." The parameters were harsh, but Thompson had learned through years of training elite operators that the standards had to exceed anything they might face in actual combat. Better to fail in training than to fail when American lives depended on their precision. Rodriguez raised his hand. "Sergeant, are the targets stationary or mobile?" "You'll find out when the exercise begins, Marine," Thompson replied. "Real operations don't come with detailed briefings about target behavior. You adapt to what you find, or you don't come home." The assembled marksmen exchanged glances, the competitive tension building as each man mentally prepared for what could be the most challenging shooting scenario of their careers. They had trained for years to reach this point, sacrificing relationships, comfort, and safety in pursuit of excellence that few people could understand or appreciate. Now 12 minutes would determine whether that sacrifice had been sufficient. Lieutenant Wilson stepped forward, his SEAL training evident in the way he moved with absolute efficiency. "Sergeant Thompson, I've reviewed the facility records. No one has completed this qualification with a perfect score in the past 18 months. Thompson nodded approvingly. "Outstanding observation, Lieutenant. Which should tell you something about the difficulty level you're facing. This isn't designed to make you feel good about your abilities. It's designed to identify the small percentage of operators who can perform miracles when miracles are required." The truth was that Thompson had designed this particular qualification course after consulting with operators who had participated in some of the most sensitive missions in recent military history. The 5-target sequence replicated a real operation where a single sniper had been required to eliminate multiple high-value targets in rapid succession, while operating alone, behind enemy lines. The original mission had required 3 different attempts with 3 different operators before it was completed successfully, and even then, it had taken nearly 30 minutes rather than 12. Staff Sergeant Rachel Martinez approached from the administration building, carrying a tablet with the morning's scheduling information. "Sergeant Thompson, we have an update to today's observer list." Thompson accepted the tablet, scanning the additions to the list of personnel who would be monitoring the qualification exercise. Senior officers frequently observe these assessments, looking for operators who might be suitable for special assignment. But today's list included some names that made him pause. "Problem, Sergeant?" Captain Stevens asked, noting Thompson's expression. "No problem," Thompson replied, though his tone suggested otherwise. "Just some additional observers who weren't originally scheduled. Nothing that affects your performance." Requirements. What Thompson didn't mention was that the observer list now included personnel from agencies that didn't officially exist. People whose presence suggested that today's qualification might be more than just routine assessment. Someone somewhere had identified a need for operators with exceptional precision capabilities, and they were looking for candidates among today's participants. The desert wind picked up slightly, creating the kind of variable conditions that could turn a perfect shot into a near miss if an operator failed to compensate properly. Thompson watched as each marksman unconsciously adjusted his stance, preparing for conditions that would test every aspect of their training and natural ability. "Gentlemen," Thompson announced, "you have 15 minutes to complete your equipment checks and prepare for the qualification exercise." Use that time wisely, because once we begin, environmental conditions, equipment performance, and your own mental state become variables you'll need to manage without assistance. As the elite marksmen dispersed to make their final preparations, Thompson couldn't shake the feeling that today's assessment would be remembered for reasons that went far beyond routine qualification scores. The observer list, the timing, and the specific nature of the 5-target sequence all suggested that someone was looking for a very particular type of operator, someone capable of precision that bordered on the impossible. What none of them knew was that within the next few hours, their understanding of what constituted impossible precision would be completely redefined by someone they would never see coming. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The security checkpoint at Camp Morrison's main gate had processed thousands of visitors over the years, but Corporal Jake Harrison had never encountered anyone quite like the woman who approached his station at exactly 947 hours. She drove a dusty Honda Civic that looked like it had seen better decades, with a "World's Best Grandma" bumper sticker and a rosary hanging from the rearview mirror. Behind the wheel sat a woman who appeared to be in her late 60s, wearing a simple floral dress, comfortable walking shoes, and carrying what looked like a homemade lunch in a brown paper bag. "Good morning, ma'am," Harrison said, leaning toward the driver's window with the practiced courtesy that came from years of dealing with lost tourists who had missed the turn to Las Vegas. "I'm afraid this is a restricted military installation. The visitor center is back about 5 miles on Highway 12. Gloria Mendez smiled warmly, the kind of genuine expression that reminded Harrison of his own grandmother back in Ohio. Her silver hair was neatly arranged in a modest bun, and when she spoke, her voice carried the gentle authority of someone who had spent decades teaching Sunday school or organizing church potlucks. "Actually, young man, I believe I'm exactly where I need to be," she said, reaching into her purse with movements that were economical despite her apparent age. "I have an appointment with Staff Sergeant Thompson at the Advanced Sniper School." Harrison's expression shifted from polite confusion to barely concealed amusement. He'd heard some creative stories from people trying to gain unauthorized access to the base, but this was a new one. "Ma'am, I'm going to need to see some identification and documentation for any authorized visits to the training facilities." Gloria handed him a worn leather wallet that looked like it had been purchased at a drugstore pharmacy. Inside was a standard Nevada driver's license that identified her as Gloria Esperanza Mendez, age 67, resident of Henderson, Nevada. Her occupation was listed as retired educator, and the photo showed the same kind face that was now looking at him expectantly. "Ma'am," Harrison said gently, "I don't show any scheduled appointments for civilian visitors at the sniper school. Today, there might be some confusion about. Check again." "Dear," Gloria interrupted, her tone remaining pleasant but carrying an undertone that made Harrison looked more carefully at the documentation she'd provided. Tucked behind her driver's license was a folded letter with official letterhead from the Department of Defense, signed by someone whose name made Harrison's eyes widen slightly. The authorization letter was brief and to the point. Gloria Mendez was authorized for immediate access to Camp Morrison's Advanced Sniper School for purposes of historical consultation and technical assessment. The signature belonged to General Patricia Blackwood, a name that even junior enlisted personnel recognized as belonging to someone whose phone calls could end careers or launch them into the stratosphere. Harrison read the letter twice, then looked back at the elderly woman who was patiently waiting while humming what sounded like an old hymn. Nothing about the situation made sense. General Blackwood was known for overseeing special operations that didn't appear in any public records. Her authorization typically involved personnel who could disappear for months at a time and return with stories they would never be allowed to tell. "Ma'am," Harrison said slowly, This authorization appears to be legitimate, but I'm going to need to verify it with the base operations center before I can. Of course. Dear, Gloria replied, checking a small watch that looked like it had been a high school graduation gift decades earlier. Though I should mention that Sergeant Thompson is expecting me in about 10 minutes. Something about observing the qualification exercise that's apparently quite important. Harrison picked up his phone and dialed the operations center, keeping his eyes on Gloria while waiting for someone to answer. She sat patiently in her driver's seat, occasionally glancing at what appeared to be knitting needles sticking out of a canvas bag in her passenger seat. Everything about her suggested she should be heading to a craft fair or grocery shopping, not visiting one of the most classified military training facilities in the country. Operations, this is Gate 7, Harrison said when the call connected. I have a civilian visitor with DOD authorization requesting access to the Advanced Sniper School. Says she has an appointment with Staff Sergeant Thompson. There was a pause, then a voice Harrison recognized as belonging to Master Sergeant Williams, a man who had been managing base operations since before Harrison was born. What's the visitor's name, Corporal? Gloria Mendez, Master Sergeant. She's got a letter signed by General Blackwood. Another pause, longer this time, followed by what sounded like typing and quiet conversation in the background. Finally, Williams came back on the line, and his tone had shifted to something Harrison had never heard before, a mixture of surprise and what might have been respect. Corporal Harrison, you are to provide Mrs. Mendez with full base access and an escort directly to the Advanced Sniper School. No delays, no additional verification required. Treat this as a Code Blue authorization. Code Blue meant immediate access with no questions asked, typically reserved for personnel whose presence was critical to national security operations. Harrison had never used those protocols for someone who looked like she should be baking cookies for a church fundraiser. Understood, Master Sergeant, Harrison replied, though his confusion was evident in his voice. Mrs. Mendez, you're cleared for immediate access. I'll have someone escort you to the sniper school right away. Gloria smiled, the same warm expression she'd maintained throughout the entire interaction. Thank you so much, dear. You've been very helpful. As Harrison called for an escort vehicle, he couldn't shake the feeling that he was missing something fundamental about the situation. The authorization was legitimate, the signatures were real, and the protocols were clear, but everything about Gloria Mendez suggested she was exactly what she appeared to be. A retired grandmother who had somehow gotten involved in something far beyond her normal routine. Staff, Sergeant Kevin Murphy arrived in a standard military vehicle within 3 minutes, having been briefed by Williams that he would be transporting a high-priority civilian to the sniper school. Murphy had expected someone in a business suit, perhaps a contractor or government official. Instead, he found himself opening the passenger door for a woman who looked like she could be his own grandmother, complete with a purse that appeared to contain enough supplies to survive a natural disaster. Mrs. Mendez? Murphy asked, though. He was clearly struggling to reconcile her appearance with the urgency of his instructions. I'm Staff Sergeant Murphy. I'll be taking you to the Advanced Sniper School. How lovely, Gloria replied, settling into the passenger seat with movements that were careful but not frail. I do hope we're not interrupting anything important. I know these young men work very hard. As Murphy drove across the base, he found himself glancing repeatedly at his passenger, trying to understand how someone who looked like she should be volunteering at a hospital gift shop had managed to generate the kind of high-level authorization that had sent the entire command structure into quiet alert mode. Ma'am, Murphy ventured carefully, if you don't mind me asking, what kind of consultation work brings you to our sniper school? Gloria looked out the window at the desert landscape, her expression becoming slightly more distant. Oh, just some old memories that might be helpful to the current generation, she said quietly. Sometimes experience from the past can provide insights that textbooks can't. The advanced sniper school came into view ahead of them, and Murphy could see the assembled marksmen completing their final preparations for the qualification exercise. They looked like what they were, the absolute elite of military precision shooting. Men who had proven themselves in combat and were now competing for positions in operations that would never be publicly acknowledged. As Murphy pulled up to the range entrance, he noticed several of the marksmen glancing in their direction with expressions of curiosity and confusion. The arrival of a civilian observer wasn't unprecedented, but someone who looked like Gloria Mendez was definitely outside their normal experience. "Here we are, Mrs. Mendez," Murphy said, coming around to open her door. "Staff Sergeant Thompson should be right over there by the shooting line." Gloria gathered her purse and what appeared to be a small cooler bag, thanking Murphy for the ride with the same genuine warmth she'd shown the gate guard. As she walked toward the range, several of the elite marksmen couldn't help but stare at the unexpected addition to their morning. Captain Stevens was the first to voice what everyone was thinking. "Sergeant Thompson," he called out, "I think someone's grandmother got lost looking for the commissary." The comment drew quiet chuckles from several of the other marksmen, who were already stressed about their upcoming qualification and found the distraction of an obviously lost civilian to be a welcome moment of levity. Thompson looked up from his clipboard to see Gloria Mendez approaching the range with the unhurried pace of someone who knew exactly where she was going. His expression shifted through several emotions in rapid succession: confusion, recognition of the woman's calm, confidence, and finally a dawning awareness that her presence might not be as random as it appeared. "Mrs. Mendez," Thompson called out, walking toward her with the formal courtesy that his training had ingrained. "I'm Staff Sergeant Thompson. I understand you have authorization to observe today's qualification exercise." "Yes, dear," Gloria replied, setting down her cooler and looking around the range with eyes that took in far more detail than a casual observer would notice. "I hope you don't mind an old woman watching your young men work. I promise not to get in the way." Lieutenant Wilson exchanged glances with Rodriguez, both men struggling to understand why their career-defining qualification exercise had suddenly become a spectator event for someone who looked like she should be worried about grandchildren rather than military precision shooting. What none of them realized was that Gloria Mendez was conducting her own assessment of the range, the personnel, and the challenge they were about to face. Her eyes moved with the systematic efficiency of someone evaluating tactical situations, noting wind patterns, light conditions, and the setup of targets that would soon test these elite operators to their limits. The stage was set for a demonstration that would shatter every assumption the assembled marksmen had about age, appearance, and what true expertise actually looked like. The whispered comments started almost immediately after Gloria settled herself on a folding chair that Staff Sergeant Murphy had hastily retrieved from the administrative building. She opened her small cooler and pulled out what appeared to be homemade sandwiches wrapped in wax paper, along with a thermos that probably contained coffee strong enough to wake the dead. To the assembled elite marksmen, she looked like someone preparing for a pleasant afternoon watching a little league game rather than observing what could be the most challenging sniper qualification of their careers. Marine Corps. Scout Sniper Rodriguez was the first to break the unspoken rule about maintaining professional composure during evaluations. He nudged Captain Stevens with his elbow and spoke in a stage whisper that carried further than he intended. 20. Buck says she asks if we have any nice young men for her granddaughter. Stevens tried to suppress a grin while checking his rifle scope for the fourth time in 10 minutes. "I'm more worried she's going to start offering us homemade cookies and telling us we're too thin." He glanced toward Gloria, who was carefully unwrapping what looked like a ham sandwich while humming something that might have been a church hymn. Seriously, how did someone's grandmother get authorization to watch classified training exercises? Lieutenant Wilson, ever the professional SEAL, maintained his stoic expression, but couldn't resist adding his own observation. Maybe she's writing a book about military heroes. You know, my grandson the Navy SEAL or something like that. He adjusted his rifle sling with practiced efficiency. Though I have to admit, General Blackwood's signature on an authorization letter isn't something you see every day. The mention of General Blackwood's name caused a brief moment of silence among the group. Even elite operators knew better than to question direct orders from someone at that level. But the disconnect between the general's reputation for managing the most sensitive military operations and the elderly woman peacefully eating lunch 20 feet away was impossible to ignore. Corporal Tommy Chun, the youngest member of the group and a recent graduate from Army Ranger School, voiced what everyone was thinking but trying not to say. Look, I don't want to be disrespectful, but what if she has some kind of medical emergency while we're doing the qualification? Are we supposed to stop everything to help her? Staff Sergeant Thompson, who had been monitoring radio communications with the range control tower, looked up from his equipment with an expression that suggested he was dealing with questions he didn't have answers for. Gentlemen, Mrs. Mendez has proper authorization to observe this exercise. Our job is to focus on the qualification, not to speculate about civilian visitors. But even Thompson found himself glancing repeatedly toward Gloria, trying to reconcile the woman's appearance with the unusual circumstances of her presence. In 15 years of training special operations personnel, he'd never encountered a situation quite like this. High-ranking officials occasionally observed training exercises. Defense contractors sometimes evaluated new equipment, and family members were very rarely permitted to witness certain ceremonies. But a 67-year-old retired educator with authorization from General Blackwood? That was unprecedented. Rodriguez decided to take a more direct approach. He walked over to where Gloria was sitting, maintaining the polite demeanor that his mother had drilled into him during childhood, but unable to completely hide his curiosity about her presence. "Ma'am," he said, touching the brim of his tactical cap in a gesture of respect, "I'm Gunnery Sergeant Rodriguez. I hope you don't mind me asking, but are you here to write about our training program? Some kind of research project, maybe?" Gloria looked up from her sandwich with the kind of warm smile that could make even the most hardened warrior feel like he was 8 years old again. "Oh, how thoughtful of you to ask, dear. No, I'm not writing anything. I'm just here to observe and perhaps offer some advice if anyone thinks it might be helpful." The phrase, "offer some advice," sent a ripple of barely suppressed amusement through the assembled marksmen. The idea that someone who looked like she should be worrying about grandchildren's soccer games could offer advice to elite military snipers was so incongruous that several of them had to turn away to avoid showing their reactions. Captain Stevens decided to join the conversation, partly out of curiosity and partly because the tension of waiting for their qualification to begin was making everyone restless. "Mrs. Mendez, what kind of advice could you possibly offer to special operations personnel? Have you had experience with military training?" Gloria's expression didn't change, but something in her eyes shifted slightly, becoming more focused and direct. "Oh, I've had some experience with precision shooting over the years. Nothing as formal as what you young men do, of course, but sometimes the fundamentals remain the same regardless of the setting." Lieutenant Wilson couldn't resist joining the conversation at that point. "What kind of precision shooting, ma'am?" "Hunting? Target shooting at a local range." "Something like that," Gloria replied, taking a sip from her thermos and watching the desert wind create small dust devils in the distance. Though the targets were usually a bit more challenging than paper bullseyes. The comment drew outright chuckles from several of the operators, who were now completely convinced that they were dealing with someone who had no understanding of what real precision shooting involved. Chun actually laughed out loud immediately, feeling guilty about it, but unable to contain his amusement at the mental image of this grandmother, comparing weekend target practice to combat operations. Ma'am, Chun said, trying to maintain politeness while making his point. I don't think you understand what we're about to attempt here. This isn't recreational shooting. We're talking about precision that can mean the difference between mission success and catastrophic failure. Lives depend on the skills we're demonstrating today. Gloria nodded thoughtfully, as if considering the importance of what he'd told her. You're absolutely right, young man. When lives depend on precision, there's no room for error. Every shot has to count, and you only get one chance to get it right. The way she said it caused Thompson to look up from his equipment checklist with renewed attention. There was something in her tone that suggested she understood exactly what Chun was talking about. Despite her appearance suggesting otherwise, Rodriguez decided to push the conversation a bit further. Partly out of genuine curiosity and partly because he was genuinely concerned about having a civilian observer who might not understand the seriousness of what they were attempting. Mrs. Mendez, with all due respect, have you ever been in a situation where someone's life actually depended on making a difficult shot? For the first time since arriving at the range, Gloria's warm expression became slightly more serious. She looked at Rodriguez with eyes that suddenly seemed much older and more experienced than her grandmother appearance suggested. Yes, dear. I have, more times than I care to remember. The simple directness of her answer created an unexpected moment of silence among the group. Something in the way she spoke suggested she wasn't exaggerating or trying to impress them, but was simply stating a fact that she'd lived with for many years. Stevens tried to lighten the mood with what he intended as gentle humor. Well, ma'am, I hope you'll understand if we don't quite believe that someone with your background has faced the same kind of challenges we're dealing with today. This isn't exactly typical civilian experience. Gloria smiled again, but this time the expression carried something that looked almost like sympathy. Oh, I completely understand your skepticism, Captain. Appearances can be very deceiving, can't they? Wilson decided to end the conversation before it became awkward for everyone involved. Ma'am, we appreciate your interest in our training, but we really need to focus on our preparation now. This qualification exercise will determine our future assignments, and we can't afford any distractions. Of course, dear, Gloria replied, carefully rewrapping the remainder of her sandwich and settling back in her chair. I'll just sit here quietly and watch you work. Please don't mind me at all. As the marksmen returned to their final preparations, the consensus among them was clear. They were dealing with a well-meaning civilian who had somehow obtained authorization to observe their training but had no real understanding of what they were about to attempt. Her presence was an amusing distraction, but nothing more than that. What none of them noticed was that while they had been focusing on her words and demeanor, Gloria had been conducting her own systematic assessment of their equipment, their positioning, their apparent stress levels, and the environmental conditions that would affect their performance. Her eyes had cataloged wind patterns, noted the quality of their weapons, evaluated their breathing techniques, and identified weaknesses in their preparation that years of training had taught her to recognize instantly. The elderly woman eating lunch in a folding chair was gathering intelligence with the efficiency of someone who had spent decades evaluating military personnel under conditions where making the wrong assessment could result in mission failure and loss of life. But to the elite marksman preparing for their career-defining qualification, she remained nothing more than someone's lost grandmother, who would soon witness what real precision shooting looked like. Staff Sergeant Thompson's radio crackled to life at exactly 1015 hours, the sharp static cutting through the desert morning air like a blade. The voice on the other end belonged to Colonel Sarah Mitchell, the commanding officer of the Advanced Sniper School, and her tone carried the kind of authority that made even seasoned instructors straighten unconsciously. Thompson, this is base. Command, are your personnel ready for the qualification exercise? Thompson keyed his radio while scanning the assembled marksmen, who had completed their equipment checks and were now standing at the ready line with the focused intensity of thoroughbreds waiting for the starting gate to open. Affirmative. Colonel, all 12 candidates are prepared and awaiting orders to commence. Outstanding. Be advised that today's exercise has been modified per directive from SOCAM headquarters. Instead of the standard 5-target sequence, you will be conducting a demonstration of advanced precision techniques for our civilian observer. Thompson's expression shifted to one of confusion as he processed the unexpected change. The qualification. Exercise had been planned for months, with specific protocols designed to test these elite operators under precisely controlled conditions. Changing the parameters at the last minute was unprecedented, especially for the benefit of a civilian observer who appeared to have no relevant military background. Colonel, can you clarify the nature of this demonstration? Thompson asked, trying to keep his voice neutral despite his growing bewilderment about the morning's events. You will establish 5 targets at maximum effective range with varying degrees of difficulty. The exercise will demonstrate current military precision shooting capabilities, after which Mrs. Mendez will provide technical assessment and recommendations. The statement hit Thompson like a physical blow. The idea that Gloria Mendez, who looked like she should be volunteering at a church bake sale, would be providing technical assessment of elite military sniper capabilities was so far outside normal protocol that he wondered if he'd misheard the transmission. Colonel, did you say Mrs. Mendez will be providing assessment? Can you confirm that directive? Affirmative, Sergeant. Mrs. Mendez is authorized to evaluate current training methodologies and offer recommendations for improvement. Treat her input as you would any subject matter expert consultation. Thompson looked toward Gloria, who was calmly finishing her coffee while observing the increasingly complex setup of range equipment with eyes that seemed to miss nothing. The disconnect between her appearance and the authority being granted to her judgment was creating a cognitive dissonance that he struggled to process. The assembled marksmen had overheard enough of the radio conversation to understand that their carefully planned qualification exercise was being transformed into some kind of demonstration for the elderly civilian they'd been dismissing as a harmless distraction. The news was met with expressions ranging from confusion to outright disbelief. Rodriguez stepped forward, his professionalism warring with his complete bewilderment about the situation. Sergeant Thompson, are you saying that our qualification scores will be evaluated by someone with no apparent military background? I'm saying that we have direct orders from Colonel Mitchell to conduct a demonstration and accept technical input from Mrs. Mendez. Thompson replied, though his own confusion was evident in his voice. Our job is to follow orders, not to question authorization that comes from levels above our pay grade. Captain Stevens tried a different approach, addressing Gloria directly with the kind of respectful skepticism that military officers used when dealing with civilian contractors whose expertise wasn't immediately apparent. Mrs. Mendez, with all due respect, what qualifications do you have to assess military sniper capabilities? Gloria set down her thermos and looked at Stevens with an expression that had shifted subtly from grandmotherly warmth to something more direct and focused. Captain, I have 43 years of experience in precision shooting under combat conditions. I've trained personnel in marksmanship techniques that aren't included in your current manuals, and I've successfully completed missions that required precision levels that exceed what you're about to demonstrate. The statement was delivered in the same gentle tone she'd been using all morning, but the content created a moment of stunned silence among the assembled operators. The idea that this elderly woman was claiming combat experience that exceeded their own was so outrageous that several of them exchanged glances that clearly questioned her mental state. Lieutenant Wilson decided to address what everyone was thinking, but trying to phrase diplomatically. Ma'am, I mean no disrespect, but women weren't permitted in combat roles during most of the past 43 years. Are you saying you served in some kind of military capacity that's different from our understanding? Of historical policy? I'm saying that official policy and operational reality don't always align perfectly, Lieutenant, Gloria replied, standing up from her chair with movements that were more fluid and controlled than anyone had noticed before. Sometimes the most important missions are the ones that don't appear in any official records. Thompson felt a chill run down his spine as he began to suspect that the morning's events were part of something much larger and more complex than a routine training exercise. The authorization from General Blackwood, the last-minute change in protocol, and Gloria's increasingly confident demeanor were combining into a pattern that suggested he was missing crucial information about what was really happening. Mrs. Mendez, Thompson said carefully, are you claiming to have participated in classified military operations? Instead of answering directly, Gloria walked toward the equipment staging area where the range's precision rifles were stored for demonstration purposes. Her movement caught the attention of every operator present, partly because of her sudden decisiveness and partly because she was approaching weapons that were restricted to authorized personnel only. Sergeant Thompson, she said, examining a custom-built .338 Lapua Magnum rifle with the kind of familiarity that comes from extensive experience. This is a beautiful weapon, but the scope mounting system is suboptimal for rapid target acquisition. Under stress conditions, she touched the rifle's bolt mechanism with fingers that moved with the practiced efficiency of someone who had field-stripped similar weapons hundreds of times. The trigger pull is adequate for recreational shooting, but it would introduce accuracy errors under combat conditions where adrenaline affects fine motor control. Her technical assessment was delivered with casual authority that made every operator present realize they were witnessing something completely unexpected. This wasn't someone making lucky guesses about military equipment. This was detailed technical knowledge that could only come from extensive hands-on experience. Corporal Chun, who had been the most openly skeptical about Gloria's presence, stepped closer to observe her examination of the weapon. Ma'am, how do you know about trigger pull specifications and scope mounting systems? Gloria looked up from the rifle with an expression that had transformed from grandmotherly kindness to something that resembled professional assessment. Because I've used similar weapons to eliminate targets at ranges that would challenge your best operators, young man. And I've done it under conditions where failure meant that good people died. The quiet authority in her voice caused a fundamental shift in the atmosphere around the range. The easy dismissal and gentle mockery that had characterized the morning's interactions was replaced by growing uncertainty about who Gloria Mendez actually was and what her presence at their training exercise really meant. Rodriguez, whose experience in Afghanistan had taught him to recognize genuine combat veterans regardless of their appearance, stepped forward with a different tone than he'd used in previous conversations. Ma'am, are you saying you're a former military sniper? I'm saying that I've been eliminating high-value targets with precision rifle fire since before most of you were born. Gloria replied, lifting the rifle with movements that demonstrated complete familiarity with its weight and balance. And I'm here today because someone in your chain of command believes that current training methodologies are insufficient for the challenges you're likely to face. Thompson's radio crackled again, and Colonel Mitchell's voice cut through the growing tension on the range. Thompson, has Mrs. Mendez begun her technical assessment? Affirmative, Colonel. She's currently examining our demonstration weapons. Outstanding. You are authorized to provide her with access to any equipment she requests for evaluation purposes. Her recommendations will be forwarded directly to SOCOM for implementation in future training protocols. The implications of the Colonel's statement hit the assembled operators like a shockwave. They weren't just dealing with an unusual civilian observer. They were witnessing an evaluation that could reshape the training procedures for elite military snipers across all branches of service. Gloria handed the rifle back to Thompson with the same careful precision she'd shown in examining it. Sergeant, I'd like to see your 5-target demonstration course. After your personnel complete their attempts, I'll show you how the same challenge can be approached with techniques that aren't currently part of your curriculum. The casual confidence with which she proposed to outperform elite military snipers created a moment of electric tension that transformed the entire dynamic of the morning's exercise. What had begun as routine qualification had become something unprecedented, a direct challenge between current military doctrine and whatever knowledge Gloria Mendez possessed from her mysterious background. As Thompson began setting up the demonstration course, he realized that the next few minutes would either validate the confidence of his elite operators or fundamentally challenge everything they thought they knew about precision shooting. The 5 targets materialized across the Nevada desert like ghosts emerging from the heat shimmer, each one positioned to test a different aspect of elite marksmanship under conditions that would challenge even the most experienced operators. Staff Sergeant Thompson had outdone himself in creating a scenario that would push these men to their absolute limits while providing Gloria Mendez with a demonstration of current military precision shooting capabilities. Target 1 stood at 800 meters, a standard military silhouette positioned on level ground with minimal environmental interference, what Thompson considered a warm-up shot for operators of this caliber. Target 2, however, represented a significant escalation, positioned at 1,200 meters on elevated terrain that required complex calculations for both distance and angle, with a crosswind that had been steadily increasing as the morning progressed. Target 3 pushed into territory that challenged even elite operators, 1,500 meters, across a valley where thermal updrafts created constantly shifting atmospheric conditions that could deflect a bullet by several inches if not properly compensated. The target itself was smaller than regulation size, simulating the precision required for eliminating a specific individual rather than achieving center mass on a standard enemy combatant. Target 4 represented the kind of shot that separated good snipers from legendary ones, 1,800 meters across terrain that included multiple wind zones, with the target position behind partial concealment that left only a narrow window of opportunity for a successful hit. The angle required shooting through a gap barely wider than the projectile itself, with no margin for error in either horizontal or vertical alignment. Target 5 existed in what most military doctrine considered impossible territory, 2,100 meters. Across the most challenging environmental conditions Thompson could create, with the target mounted on a mechanism that created subtle movement patterns designed to simulate a living person who wasn't cooperating by standing perfectly still. The shot required not just technical excellence, but the ability to predict human behavior and time the trigger pull to intersect with the target's position at the exact moment the bullet arrived. Captain Stevens approached the firing line first, his confidence evident in every movement as he settled into position behind his customized M24 rifle. Years of combat experience in Afghanistan had taught him to read environmental conditions instinctively, and his reputation for accuracy under pressure had made him the informal leader among this group of elite operators. Target 1 acquired, Stevens announced, his voice carrying the calm professionalism that came from years of making shots that mattered. The first shot echoed across the desert like thunder, and the spotting scope confirmed a perfect center mass hit that would have eliminated any human target instantly. Clean kill, Thompson confirmed, making notes on his evaluation sheet while trying not to glance toward Gloria, who was observing the demonstration with an expression of polite interest that revealed nothing about her assessment of the operators. Performance. Target 2 required nearly 3 minutes of careful calculation as Stevens adjusted for wind, elevation, and atmospheric conditions that were constantly changing in the desert heat. When he finally fired, the bullet struck within 2 inches of center mass, a shot that would have been considered exceptional under normal circumstances, but represented the kind of precision these men expected from themselves. Rodriguez took over for Target 3, His Marine Corps training, evident in the methodical way he approached the complex environmental calculations required for the 1,500-meter shot. The thermal updrafts created invisible air currents that could push a bullet off course without warning, requiring instinctive compensation based on experience rather than textbook calculations. His shot took nearly 4 minutes to set up, with constant micro-adjustments as he waited for a moment when the atmospheric conditions aligned properly. When he finally squeezed the trigger, the bullet struck the target zone, but not with the precision that any of them would have preferred under normal circumstances. "Acceptable hit," Thompson announced, though his tone suggested that acceptable wasn't the standard these operators typically achieved. The pressure of performing for an observer who claimed superior expertise was affecting their normal confidence levels in ways that none of them had anticipated. Lieutenant Wilson approached Target 4 with the kind of focused intensity that SEAL training had burned into his nervous system. The 1,800-meter shot through partial concealment represented the kind of challenge that had made his reputation in special operations, where success often depended on making impossible shots under conditions that would defeat most snipers. The setup took nearly 6 minutes as Wilson calculated not just the ballistic requirements, but the precise angle needed to thread the bullet through the narrow gap in the target's concealment. Environmental conditions were constantly shifting, and he had to wait for a moment when wind patterns aligned properly across multiple zones between his position and the target. When he finally fired, the bullet passed through the concealment gap but struck the target several inches off center, close enough to achieve the mission objective in a real scenario, but not with the precision that elite operators demanded from themselves. "Effective hit," Thompson confirmed, but there was something in his voice that suggested he was beginning to wonder whether current training methodologies were preparing these operators for the absolute precision that their future missions might require. Corporal Chun stepped up to attempt Target 5, with the kind of nervous energy that came from being the youngest and least experienced member of an elite group. The 2,100-meter shot with moving target represented a challenge that exceeded anything he'd attempted in combat, requiring skills that pushed beyond current military doctrine into territory that bordered on the impossible. The mathematical calculations alone took nearly 8 minutes, with Chun constantly recalculating as environmental conditions changed and the target's movement pattern became more complex. When he finally fired, the bullet passed close enough to the target to confirm that his calculations were essentially correct, but the precision required to hit a moving target at that range exceeded his current capabilities. "Near miss," Thompson announced, though he was careful to note that the shot demonstrated technical competence that exceeded standard military requirements even though it hadn't achieved the objective. As the demonstration concluded, the assembled operators stood in a semicircle around the firing line, their expressions reflecting a mixture of professional satisfaction and growing unease about what Gloria's assessment of their performance might reveal. They had demonstrated capabilities that exceeded normal military standards, but none of them had achieved the kind of absolute precision that they typically demanded from themselves. Gloria rose from her chair, with movements that seemed more purposeful than they had appeared earlier in the morning. She walked toward the firing line with the unhurried confidence of someone who was completely comfortable in an environment that had just challenged some of the military's most elite personnel. "Thank you, gentlemen," she said, her voice carrying the same warm tone that had characterized her interactions throughout the morning. "That was an excellent demonstration of current military precision shooting capabilities." Stephen stepped forward, his professionalism warring with his curiosity about what conclusions she had drawn from observing their performance. "Mrs. Mendez, what's your assessment of what you just witnessed?" Gloria looked across the desert toward the 5 targets that had challenged these elite operators, her expression becoming more focused and analytical than anyone had seen before. "You demonstrated technical competence that meets current military standards," she said quietly. "But the techniques you're using were developed for warfare that no longer exists." The statement created a moment of uncomfortable silence among the group. The idea that their elite training might be inadequate for current operational requirements was difficult to accept, especially coming from someone whose credentials remained unclear despite her demonstrated knowledge of their equipment. "Ma'am," Rodriguez said carefully, "what do you mean by warfare that no longer exists?" Gloria's smile carried something that looked almost like sympathy as she prepared to demonstrate capabilities that would fundamentally challenge everything these elite operators thought they knew about precision shooting. "I mean that the targets you'll face in real operations won't give you 6 minutes to calculate atmospheric conditions, gentlemen. And they certainly won't wait patiently while you make multiple attempts to achieve acceptable accuracy." She gestured toward the same rifle that Stevens had used for his demonstration, her movements shifting from the careful deliberation of an elderly civilian to something that suggested complete familiarity with weapons designed for eliminating human targets at impossible ranges. "Now let me show you how the same 5 targets can be eliminated in under 2 minutes, using techniques that your current training manuals don't include." The casual confidence with which she proposed to outperform their collective efforts created a moment of electric tension that transformed the entire atmosphere around the range. What had begun as a routine demonstration was about to become something that would either validate decades of military doctrine or reveal fundamental flaws in everything they thought they knew about precision shooting. Gloria Mendez lifted the rifle with movements that seemed to flow like water, her posture transforming from elderly civilian to something that resembled a predator assessing its hunting ground. The weapon that had required careful handling by trained operators settled into her hands as if it had been custom-built for her grip, and her breathing shifted to the controlled rhythm that snipers spent years learning to master. "Staff Sergeant." Thompson glanced at his chronometer and called out the official start time. Demonstration commencing at 10:47 hours. He expected to be recording a well-intentioned, but ultimately unsuccessful attempt by a civilian to replicate military precision shooting. Instead, he found himself documenting something that would challenge every assumption about age, gender, and combat effectiveness that he'd developed over 15 years of training elite operators, without the extended preparation ritual that had characterized the previous attempts. Gloria shouldered the rifle and acquired target 1 at 800 meters in less than 15 seconds. Her breathing pattern was unlike anything Thompson had observed in conventional sniper training, deeper, more controlled, with timing that seemed to synchronize with environmental conditions rather than fighting against them. The first shot cracked across the desert with authority that seemed different from the previous demonstrations, and the spotting scope revealed a hit that was not just center mass, but precisely centered in a way that suggested she had aimed for that exact spot rather than accepting whatever accuracy the environmental conditions might provide. "Perfect center hit," Thompson announced, his voice carrying a note of surprise that he tried to suppress. Time elapsed, 23 seconds. But Gloria was already transitioning to target 2 at 1,200 meters, her movement so fluid that she seemed to be conducting a single continuous action rather than separate shots. Where the previous operators had spent minutes calculating wind drift and elevation adjustments, she appeared to be making instinctive compensations based on experience that transcended textbook mathematics. Her second shot came exactly 38 seconds after the first, and the result drew an audible gasp from Corporal Chun, who was observing through binoculars. The bullet had struck the elevated target with precision that exceeded what any of them had achieved, despite their extended preparation time. "Direct center hit," Thompson confirmed, realizing that he was witnessing something that fell outside normal parameters for civilian marksmanship. Total elapsed time, 1 minute, 1 second. Rodriguez stepped closer to observe Gloria's technique, his professional instincts overriding his initial skepticism about her capabilities. What he saw challenged everything he understood about precision. Shooting under pressure. Instead of the tense concentration that characterized most snipers attempting difficult shots, Gloria appeared to be completely relaxed, as if she were performing routine maintenance rather than attempting shots that had challenged elite military operators. Target: 3 at 1,500 meters across the thermally active valley required. Compensation for atmospheric conditions that changed constantly, creating shooting challenges that most doctrine considered beyond effective engagement range for individual personnel. Gloria's approach to these conditions was unlike anything in conventional training manuals. She seemed to be reading air currents and thermal patterns through subtle environmental cues that the others had missed entirely. Her third shot came at 1 minute 26 seconds total elapsed time, and struck target 3 with accuracy that made Captain Stevens question whether he was witnessing some kind of equipment malfunction or optical illusion. The precision exceeded what thermal scopes and ballistic computers typically achieved, accomplished through techniques that appeared to rely on human sensory input rather than technological assistance. "Confirmed hit, dead center," Thompson announced, his voice now carrying unmistakable amazement. "This is unprecedented." Lieutenant Wilson moved to a position where he could observe both Gloria's shooting technique and the target results simultaneously, his SEAL training making him analyze every aspect of what he was witnessing for later tactical assessment. What he saw challenged fundamental assumptions about human limitations under combat stress. Gloria's breathing remained controlled and steady despite the increasing difficulty of each successive target. Her trigger control showed none of the microtremors that affected even elite operators when attempting maximum range precision shots. Most remarkably, her transition time between targets suggested situational awareness that allowed her to begin calculating the next shot while still completing the current one. Target: 4 at 1,800 meters through partial concealment represented the kind of challenge that separated legendary snipers from merely excellent ones. The narrow gap in the target's concealment required threading a bullet through an opening that provided no margin for error, while environmental conditions at that range created variables that could deflect the projectile by inches despite perfect aim. Gloria's approach to this challenge revealed techniques that weren't included in any military manual Thompson had studied. Instead of the prolonged aim-and-hold method that conventional training emphasized, she appeared to be timing her shot to coincide with momentary atmospheric conditions that created optimal bullet flight paths. Her fourth shot came at 1 minute 51 seconds total elapsed time, and the result caused Lieutenant Wilson to lower his binoculars and stare at Gloria with an expression of complete bewilderment. The bullet had not just passed through the concealment gap, it had struck the target with precision that suggested she had compensated for factors that the others hadn't even recognized as variables. Perfect hit through concealment, Thompson confirmed, his professional composure beginning to crack as he processed the implications of what he was documenting. Total time: 1 minute 51 seconds. The final target at 2,100 meters with random movement patterns represented a challenge that most military doctrine considered impossible for individual engagement. The combination of extreme range, environmental complexity, and target movement created variables that exceeded human computational ability, requiring prediction skills that bordered on precognition. As Gloria prepared for the final shot, the assembled operators found themselves holding their breath despite their professional training. They were witnessing a demonstration of capabilities that challenged everything they understood about human limitations in precision shooting, performed by someone whose appearance suggested she should be worried about grandchildren. Rather than eliminating targets at ranges that challenged their best equipment, Gloria's final shot came at exactly 1 minute 58 seconds total, elapsed time 2 seconds under her promised completion time. The bullet's flight path across 2,100 meters of desert atmosphere seemed to bend physics itself, striking the moving target at the precise moment when its position intersected with the projectile's arrival. Confirmed kill shot on moving target, Thompson announced, his voice carrying a note of awe that he couldn't suppress. Total demonstration time, 1 minute 58 seconds. All 5 targets eliminated with center mass precision. The silence that followed was profound, broken only by the desert wind and the distant sound of shell casings settling on the ground. The assembled elite operators stood motionless, their minds struggling to process what they had witnessed and what it meant for everything they thought they knew about their own capabilities. Rodriguez was the first to find his voice, though it came out as barely more than a whisper. "Ma'am, what you just did. That's not possible with conventional training. Methods." Gloria set the rifle down with the same careful precision she had shown throughout the demonstration, her breathing returning to the gentle rhythm of someone who had just completed routine exercise rather than achieving something that redefined the boundaries of human marksmanship. "You're absolutely right, dear," she replied, her voice carrying the same warm tone that had characterized her interactions throughout the morning. "What I just demonstrated can't be achieved through conventional training methods because conventional methods are designed for conventional warfare." She looked across the desert toward the 5 targets that had challenged these elite operators individually, but which she had eliminated collectively in less time than any of them had required for a single shot. "What you witnessed," Gloria continued, "represents techniques developed for operations that don't officially exist, against targets that require precision levels that your current doctrine considers impossible." The implications of her statement hit the assembled operators like a physical force. They weren't just witnessing superior marksmanship, they were seeing capabilities that suggested an entirely different level of warfare, conducted by personnel whose existence challenged everything they understood about military organization and operational capability. As the Nevada sun climbed higher and the desert heat continued to build, the elite operators of America's Advanced Sniper School realized that their education was just beginning, and their teacher was someone they had dismissed as a harmless grandmother just hours earlier. The radio static crackled across the desert silence like electricity before Colonel Sarah Mitchell's voice cut through the stunned atmosphere surrounding the shooting range. "Thompson, patch me through to base-wide communications. All personnel, all frequencies." Staff Sergeant Thompson fumbled with his radio equipment, his hands still trembling slightly from witnessing a demonstration that had redefined everything he thought he understood about human capability under extreme conditions. "Colonel, you're connected to base-wide. All stations are monitoring." Colonel Mitchell's voice, when it came through the speakers, carried an authority that made every person within hearing distance straighten unconsciously. "All personnel at Camp Morrison, you are hereby informed that you are in the presence of Master Chief Petty Officer Gloria Esperanza Mendez, United States Navy, retired." Master Chief Mendez served with distinction in the Naval Special Warfare Development Group for 23 years, during which time she conducted precision elimination operations in 47 countries under circumstances that remain classified at the highest levels of national security. The words hit the assembled operators like a series of physical blows, each revelation forcing them to recontextualize everything they had witnessed and everything they thought they knew about military history, gender roles in combat, and the limitations of classified operations. Captain Stevens found his voice first, though it came out hoarse with shock. "Master Chief, Navy SEALs didn't. Women weren't. Women weren't officially part of naval special warfare." Gloria interrupted gently, her demeanor shifting to reveal the command presence that 23 years of leading impossible missions had burned into her personality. "Officially, I spent my career as a communications specialist stationed at various administrative posts around the world. Unofficially, one eliminated high-value targets in situations where conventional special operations were deemed too risky or politically sensitive. Lieutenant Wilson, whose SEAL training had included extensive study of naval special warfare history, stepped forward with an expression that mixed awe with complete bewilderment. "Master Chief, there are no records of female operators in Devagru. How is that possible?" Gloria's smile carried the weight of decades spent operating in shadows so deep that even their existence was deniable. "Because, Lieutenant, the most successful operations are the ones that never happened, conducted by personnel who were never there, against targets whose elimination was attributed to accidents, illness, or internal conflicts rather than precision." Military action. Rodriguez, his Marine Corps' background making him particularly sensitive to issues of military recognition and honor, asked the question that was bothering all of them. "Master Chief, why haven't your accomplishments been officially recognized? Why maintain the cover story after retirement?" "Because recognition would compromise ongoing operations and endanger personnel who are still active in similar roles," Gloria replied, her voice carrying the patient authority of someone who had spent years explaining classified necessities to people without appropriate clearance levels. "The missions I conducted saved thousands of lives by preventing conflicts that would have required conventional military intervention. That success depended on absolute anonymity." Staff Sergeant Thompson, still struggling to process the morning's revelations, consulted his official records on a tablet that had been provided for documenting the exercise. "Master Chief, according to this information from Command, your longest confirmed elimination was at 2,847 meters in adverse weather conditions. Is that accurate?" 2,847 meters through a sandstorm in Syria, 1987, Gloria confirmed matter-of-factly. Soviet arms dealer who was coordinating weapons shipments to 3 different terrorist organizations. The shot required compensating for wind speeds that exceeded weather service measurements and sand particulates that created optical distortions not covered in any training manual. The casual way she discussed a shot that exceeded the longest confirmed sniper kills in military history by several hundred meters created another moment of stunned silence among the elite operators. They were dealing with someone whose capabilities existed in territory they hadn't known was possible for human achievement. Corporal Chun, still trying to reconcile Gloria's grandmother appearance with her demonstrated lethal expertise, asked the question that revealed his complete cognitive disconnect. "Master Chief, how do you transition from eliminating targets at impossible ranges to looking like someone's grandmother at a church social?" Gloria's laugh carried genuine warmth mixed with something that might have been relief. "Because, after 23 years of living in shadows, maintaining cover identities, and eliminating people who needed to die to protect American interests, I wanted to experience what normal life felt like. Being someone's grandmother at a church social is a luxury that most people take for granted." The personal cost of her service was beginning to become clear to the assembled operators. Not only had she risked her life in operations that couldn't be acknowledged, but she had sacrificed the possibility of normal relationships, family life, and social connections that civilian life provided. Her retirement wasn't just a career change. It was an opportunity to experience human normalcy. For the first time in decades, Lieutenant Wilson's tactical mind was processing the operational implications of what he'd learned. "Master Chief, the techniques you demonstrated today, are they documented anywhere? Could they be taught to current personnel?" "Some techniques can be taught," Gloria replied, walking back toward the rifle she had used for her demonstration. "Others require experience that can only be gained through years of operational deployment under conditions that we hope current personnel will never face." She picked up the weapon again, but this time her handling revealed subtleties that the operators had missed during her demonstration. Her grip showed modifications that weren't standard military doctrine. Her stance incorporated elements that seemed designed for rapid target transitions, and her breathing pattern suggested training that went beyond anything in conventional sniper schools. The fundamental difference, Gloria continued, between conventional military marksmanship and the techniques I developed is the assumption about available time. Your training assumes you'll have minutes to calculate, adjust, and execute. My missions typically provided seconds to identify, engage, and eliminate before disappearing without leaving evidence of external intervention. Rodriguez stepped closer to observe her weapon handling techniques more carefully. Master Chief, what kind of training pipeline produced these capabilities? How long did it take to develop skills at this level? 14 years of continuous operational deployment, Gloria replied, demonstrating a loading technique that was faster and more efficient than standard military procedure. Training that began with conventional special operations and evolved through necessity as missions became increasingly complex and politically sensitive. The timeline she described suggested a level of continuous combat experience that exceeded what most modern operators accumulated over entire careers. While current personnel deployed for tours measured in months, Gloria had spent over a decade in operational status under conditions that required constant adaptation and skill development. Captain Stevens, whose pride in his own elite status was being systematically dismantled by Gloria's revelations, asked the question that addressed his fundamental confusion about military history. Master Chief, if personnel with your capabilities existed, why weren't these techniques incorporated into standard training programs? Because acknowledging that these techniques exist would require acknowledging that the missions requiring them exist, Gloria explained patiently. And those missions represent a level of American military intervention that can't be publicly discussed without compromising diplomatic relationships and operational security. Staff Sergeant Thompson's radio crackled again, and Colonel Mitchell's voice provided additional context that further complicated the morning's revelations. All personnel, be advised that Master Chief Mendez is here today because current global threat assessment suggests that conventional special operations training may be insufficient for emerging challenges. Her techniques represent capabilities that may be required for future missions that exceed current operational parameters. The implication was clear. They weren't just witnessing a historical demonstration, but potentially observing training methods that would be necessary for future operations that current doctrine couldn't handle. Gloria's presence represented both a link to classified history and preparation for classified future requirements. As the Nevada sun continued its climb toward midday, the assembled elite operators realized they were standing at the intersection of military history they had never been taught and operational future they weren't prepared for. Guided by someone whose very existence challenged everything they thought they knew about American military capabilities, the lesson about humility, respect, and the dangers of assumptions had evolved into something much larger, an education about the hidden dimensions of national defense and the personnel who operated in shadows so deep that their sacrifices could never be officially acknowledged. 3 months after the demonstration that had shattered every assumption about age, capability, and hidden expertise, the Advanced Sniper School at Camp Morrison had become a different institution entirely. The techniques that Master Chief Gloria Mendez had revealed in those stunning 98 seconds had revolutionized not just training protocols, but the fundamental understanding of what human precision could achieve under impossible conditions. Captain Stevens stood at the same firing line where his confidence had been systematically dismantled by a woman he'd dismissed as someone's lost grandmother. But now, using breathing techniques that Gloria had spent weeks teaching him, he was consistently achieving accuracy at ranges that had previously challenged his absolute best efforts. The transformation wasn't just technical, it was philosophical, representing a complete reconstruction of his approach to precision shooting and tactical thinking. Target acquired at 1,800 meters, Stevens announced into his radio, his voice carrying the calm confidence that came from training methods that emphasized adaptation over calculation. Instead of the minutes of preparation that his old techniques had required, he fired within 37 seconds of target identification, striking center mass with precision that would have been impossible using conventional doctrine. Rodriguez, who had initially mocked Gloria's appearance while completely missing the lethal expertise concealed beneath her grandmother facade, now served as the primary instructor for what had become known as the Mendez Method, a classified training program that was rapidly being implemented across all branches of special operations. His own transformation had been profound, evolving from a skilled marksman who relied on textbook techniques to an adaptive operator who could compensate for environmental variables that conventional training didn't even recognize. The key insight that Master Chief Mendez provided, Rodriguez explained to a new group of elite operators who had arrived for advanced training, is that environmental conditions aren't obstacles to overcome, but information sources to exploit. Instead of fighting against wind, thermal currents, and atmospheric pressure, we learn to read them as guidance systems that actually improve accuracy when properly understood. The new trainees listened with the focused intensity that came from knowing they were receiving instruction based on operational experience that had shaped international events for over 2 decades. Word had spread through special operations communities about the revolution in precision shooting techniques, though the source of those techniques remained classified at levels that most personnel would never achieve. Lieutenant Wilson had perhaps undergone the most dramatic transformation of all the original participants in that morning's demonstration. His SEAL background had provided him with the mental flexibility to rapidly adapt Gloria's techniques to maritime environments, developing applications for precision shooting from unstable platforms, under conditions that had previously been considered impossible for individual engagement. Master Chief Mendez taught us that stability comes from understanding motion, not from fighting it, Wilson explained during a classified briefing to Naval Special Warfare commanders. When shooting from a boat, aircraft, or any moving platform, conventional doctrine teaches us to wait for stable moments. Her techniques teach us to synchronize with the motion itself, turning instability into a predictable variable rather than an uncontrollable complication. The implications extended far beyond improved marksmanship scores. The cognitive flexibility required to master Gloria's techniques was producing operators who could adapt to unexpected situations with speed and effectiveness that exceeded previous benchmarks for elite performance. Mission success rates had improved across multiple operational theaters, with after-action reports consistently noting enhanced precision and reduced collateral damage in situations that required individual intervention. Corporal Chun, who had been the most openly skeptical about an elderly civilian's ability to contribute to military training, now coordinated the psychological preparation component of the Mendez Method training program. His initial embarrassment about dismissing Gloria, based on age and appearance, had evolved into a profound understanding of how assumptions could compromise operational effectiveness. The lesson isn't just about respecting people regardless of their appearance, Chun told new trainees during orientation sessions. It's about recognizing that expertise often develops in ways that don't match our expectations, and that the most dangerous operational mistake is assuming we understand a situation based on incomplete information. The psychological transformation extended beyond technical skills to fundamental changes in how these elite operators approached interpersonal assessment and threat evaluation. Reports from operational deployments indicated improved situational awareness and enhanced ability to identify both threats and assets that conventional profiling methods might miss. Staff Sergeant Thompson had been promoted to Master Sergeant and assigned to oversee the integration of Gloria's techniques into standard special operations curriculum. His role had evolved from training elite marksmen to helping reshape the entire conceptual framework for precision operations under extreme conditions. Master Chief Mendez didn't just demonstrate superior shooting techniques, Thompson explained. to senior military leadership during quarterly assessments. She revealed fundamental limitations in our understanding of human capability under stress. The techniques themselves are just the beginning. The real transformation is in recognizing that current doctrine may be constraining performance rather than optimizing it. She picked up the weapon again, but this time her handling revealed subtleties that the operators had missed during her demonstration. Her grip showed modifications that weren't standard military doctrine. Her stance incorporated elements that seemed designed for rapid target transitions, and her breathing pattern suggested training that went beyond anything in conventional sniper schools. The fundamental difference, Gloria continued, between conventional military marksmanship and the techniques I developed is the assumption about available time. Your training assumes you'll have minutes to calculate, adjust, and execute. My missions typically provided seconds to identify, engage, and eliminate before disappearing without leaving evidence of external intervention. Rodriguez stepped closer to observe her weapon handling techniques more carefully. Master Chief, what kind of training pipeline produced these capabilities? How long did it take to develop skills at this level? 14 years of continuous operational deployment, Gloria replied, demonstrating a loading technique that was faster and more efficient than standard military procedure. Training that began with conventional special operations and evolved through necessity as missions became increasingly complex and politically sensitive. The timeline she described suggested a level of continuous combat experience that exceeded what most modern operators accumulated over entire careers. While current personnel deployed for tours measured in months, Gloria had spent over a decade in operational status under conditions that required constant adaptation and skill development. Captain Stevens, whose pride in his own elite status was being systematically dismantled by Gloria's revelations, asked the question that addressed his fundamental confusion about military history. Master Chief, if personnel with your capabilities existed, why weren't these techniques incorporated into standard training programs? Because acknowledging that these techniques exist would require acknowledging that the missions requiring them exist, Gloria explained patiently. And those missions represent a level of American military intervention that can't be publicly discussed without compromising diplomatic relationships and operational security. Staff Sergeant Thompson's radio crackled again, and Colonel Mitchell's voice provided additional context that further complicated the morning's revelations. All personnel, be advised that Master Chief Mendez is here today because current global threat assessment suggests that conventional special operations training may be insufficient for emerging challenges. Her techniques represent capabilities that may be required for future missions that exceed current operational parameters. The implication was clear. They weren't just witnessing a historical demonstration, but potentially observing training methods that would be necessary for future operations that current doctrine couldn't handle. Gloria's presence represented both a link to classified history and preparation for classified future requirements. As the Nevada sun continued its climb toward midday, the assembled elite operators realized they were standing at the intersection of military history they had never been taught and operational future they weren't prepared for. Guided by someone whose very existence challenged everything they thought they knew about American military capabilities, the lesson about humility, respect, and the dangers of assumptions had evolved into something much larger, an education about the hidden dimensions of national defense and the personnel who operated in shadows, so deep that their sacrifices could never be officially acknowledged. 3 months after the demonstration that had shattered every assumption about age, capability, and hidden expertise, the Advanced Sniper School at Camp Morrison had become a different institution entirely. The techniques that Master Chief Gloria Mendez had revealed in those stunning 98 seconds had revolutionized not just training protocols, but the fundamental understanding of what human precision could achieve under impossible conditions. Captain, Stephen stood at the same firing line where his confidence had been systematically dismantled by a woman he'd dismissed as someone's lost grandmother. But now, using breathing techniques that Gloria had spent weeks teaching him, he was consistently achieving accuracy at ranges that had previously challenged his absolute best efforts. The transformation wasn't just technical, it was philosophical, representing a complete reconstruction of his approach to precision shooting and tactical thinking. Target acquired at 1,800 meters, Stevens announced into his radio, his voice carrying the calm confidence that came from training methods that emphasized adaptation over calculation. Instead of the minutes of preparation that his old techniques had required, he fired within 37 seconds of target identification, striking center mass with precision that would have been impossible using conventional doctrine. Rodriguez, who had initially mocked Gloria's appearance while completely missing the lethal expertise concealed beneath her grandmother facade, now served as the primary instructor for what had become known as the Mendez Method, a classified training program that was rapidly being implemented across all branches of special operations. His own transformation had been profound, evolving from a skilled marksman who relied on textbook techniques to an adaptive operator who could compensate for environmental variables that conventional training didn't even recognize. The key insight that Master Chief Mendez provided, Rodriguez explained to a new group of elite operators who had arrived for advanced training, is that environmental conditions aren't obstacles to overcome, but information sources to exploit. Instead of fighting against wind, thermal currents, and atmospheric pressure, we learn to read them as guidance systems that actually improve accuracy when properly understood. The new trainees listened with the focused intensity that came from knowing they were receiving instruction based on operational experience that had shaped international events for over 2 decades. Word had spread through special operations communities about the revolution in precision shooting techniques, though the source of those techniques remained classified at levels that most personnel would never achieve. Lieutenant Wilson had perhaps undergone the most dramatic transformation of all the original participants in that morning's demonstration. His SEAL background had provided him with the mental flexibility to rapidly adapt Gloria's techniques to maritime environments, developing applications for precision shooting from unstable platforms, under conditions that had previously been considered impossible for individual engagement. Master Chief Mendez taught us that stability comes from understanding motion, not from fighting it, Wilson explained during a classified briefing to Naval Special Warfare commanders. When shooting from a boat, aircraft, or any moving platform, conventional doctrine teaches us to wait for stable moments. Her techniques teach us to synchronize with the motion itself, turning instability into a predictable variable rather than an uncontrollable complication. The implications extended far beyond improved marksmanship scores. The cognitive flexibility required to master Gloria's techniques was producing operators who could adapt to unexpected situations with speed and effectiveness that exceeded previous benchmarks for elite performance. Mission success rates had improved across multiple operational theaters, with after-action reports consistently noting enhanced precision and reduced collateral damage in situations that required individual intervention. Corporal Chun, who had been the most openly skeptical about an elderly civilian's ability to contribute to military training, now coordinated the psychological preparation component of the Mendez Method training program. His initial embarrassment about dismissing Gloria, based on age and appearance, had evolved into a profound understanding of how assumptions could compromise operational effectiveness. The lesson isn't just about respecting people regardless of their appearance, Chun told new trainees during orientation sessions. It's about recognizing that expertise often develops in ways that don't match our expectations, and that the most dangerous operational mistake is assuming we understand a situation based on incomplete information. The psychological transformation extended beyond technical skills to fundamental changes in how these elite Operators approached interpersonal assessment and threat evaluation. Reports from operational deployments indicated improved situational awareness and enhanced ability to identify both threats and assets that conventional profiling methods might miss. Staff Sergeant Thompson had been promoted to Master Sergeant and assigned to oversee the integration of Gloria's techniques into standard special operations curriculum. His role had evolved from training elite marksmen to helping reshape the entire conceptual framework for precision operations under extreme conditions. Master Chief Mendez didn't just demonstrate superior shooting techniques, Thompson explained, to senior military leadership during quarterly assessments. She revealed fundamental limitations in our understanding of human capability under stress. The techniques themselves are just the beginning. The real transformation is in recognizing that current doctrine may be constraining performance rather than optimizing it.